Welcome to the Janelle King Show. I'm Janelle King, and this is Extra 106.3. And this is where we discuss kitchen table topics that are typically banned from family gatherings, but are absolutely necessary in order to have a strong republic. I have a question. What happens to a society when looking in the mirror becomes a lost art? When everything that happens, particularly the bad things that happens, tends to always have some type of external explanation. In other words, you hear words like I and me suddenly become you and them. It's the conversations that go like this. I heard Lucy was divorcing her husband, and the immediate response is, well, what did he do? Or when you see someone standing in front of a business that was broken into during a riot, and instead of asking, why did you do this? The question is, what made you do this? You see, we're living in an era that treats personal responsibility like a disease rather than a cure. So today's table topic, we're talking about the age of no accountability. I felt like this for a very long time. I've spoken about it on my show and when I commentate on national media. But during those times, it was more of a warning, like a sounding of the alarm, because I always saw that there was something on the horizon that's finally coming into fruition. We have finally reached the age of no accountability. I mean, these days, people believe that they can get away with anything, including murder. It went from our parents not allowing many of us to use the word lie, but instead to say something like, you didn't tell the truth, which takes full accountability. Then we hear things like, oh, it's just a little fib. That became okay. So now it's okay to lie, but as long as it's during appropriate times. Then it became, I lied to protect you. Or if that same lie didn't hurt the other person, then why should I be held accountable for it? All of these little subtle changes quickly brought us into this space where we are today, where I see people of all race, background, ethnicity saying things like, yes, he committed murder, but he should get off anyway. Because I don't like how he's being treated, or because he's black, or whatever ridiculous reason that they come up with. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about Carmelo Anthony, not to be confused with the basketball player, for those who know, and the Rick Child case. These are two cases that are front and center as of today, and I've watched it and watched it and watched it. I didn't want to jump on a bandwagon, but I started noticing something, and I said, you know what? I got to talk about what I think I see as far as root causes, because this is what I was concerned about years ago. So first, let's look at some of the cold hard facts of what actually went down in the Carmelo Anthony case on April 2nd, 2025 at the track meet in Frisco, Texas. So, to be clear, on that day, it was a severe weather day. It was pouring down rain, or rain was expected to be pouring down. So 17-year-old Carmelo Anthony decided that he wanted to walk himself under the tent designated for a completely different school. Not his team tent, the other school's tent. There he was met by the Metcalf twins, Hunter and Austin, who confronted him and told him that they wanted him to leave and that he doesn't belong there. A verbal argument breaks out. Let's start there. Why are we arguing? If you're not supposed to be there, you're not supposed to be there, but whatever. But then witnesses say that Anthony refused to move, and instead he reached into his backpack, and then you hear him say, touch me and see what happens. And we all saw what happened. Austin Metcalf then stepped back and physically pushed Anthony to force him out of their tent. And the immediate response to that push, Carmelo pulls a 3.5-inch pocket knife out of his bag and plunges it directly into Austin's chest, piercing his heart. And according to court reports, the knife literally went into one side of his heart and out of the other. But what did Anthony do? Did he jump down and try to perform CPR and say, oh my God, I was scared? No, he doesn't stay to help. He doesn't call the ambulance. He flees the stadium on foot, dumps the weapon nearby, leaves a 17-year-old kid to collapse and die on the bleachers, all while coaches were desperately trying to perform CPR. And on June 9th, 2026, 19-year-old Carmelo Anthony was found guilty of murder. He was sentenced to 35 years in prison for this stabbing of Austin Metcalf, where he died. Now, Anthony's team, his legal team, fought hard on the self-defense angle and the whole sudden passion angle, claiming that he reacted out of fear and chaos during a rainy confrontation. The jury rejected it within hours of deliberation. And honestly, I don't believe the witness statements reflected that defense either, because from my understanding, I believe they had at least 20 students come and speak. They were all witnesses or quote unquote, saw something. And as a result of it, they all said that they didn't see anything that was threatening. So the trial went by pretty fast, and he got 35 years. You would think that would be a closed case, right? Like, we found out, we the system worked, it did what it did. Pretty straightforward. He was under the tent, he was arguing with him, he threatened him, he encouraged him to push him. It felt like, I'm going to say that, it felt like he wanted to have some harsh, heavy confrontation. And no one knows why, because he didn't take the stand to even defend himself. So much that he tried to get the officer arresting him to agree that he was defending himself while he was still on the scene. An officer who did not see what happened, but he did ask, isn't this self-defense or something like that? He didn't ask the officer if Austin was alive or dead. And that theme of selfishness continued until the day of his sentencing. And when his parents, who raised over $1 million for his defense, but are under speculation because they're saying that they may have spent the money, I think $500K on a house or something, allegedly. And allegedly they weren't in the courtroom when their son was sentenced either, which I thought was crazy. But some may say that it was too hard to hear, that your son was going to be sentenced. And, that I call bull on that. It's not as nearly as hard as it's going to be for Carmelo. So I think you should have shown up. So you have that case and all of that. But now I want to take you to South Carolina, and let's talk about Rick Child. Because on May 28th, 2023, outside of a Shell gas station in Columbia, South Carolina, a case just wrapped up in court where a 14-year-old boy, Cyrus Carmack Belton, walks into a convenience store owned by Rick Child, and the Child family suspects the teen of possibly shoplifting water bottles, and after seeing him handle them near the cooler, Carmack Belton then leaves the store, and Mr. Child and his son, Andy, pursue him on foot, I guess trying to see if he stole something. And the investigators later confirmed that the kid did not actually steal any merchandise, but here is what he did have in his possession. An illegal, because he's 14, loaded, semi-automatic 9mm pistol. Now, according to Mr. Child's defense attorney, Sean Kent, the bag Carmack was carrying had nothing but a gun inside. So while they're following him, apparently the teen trips and falls or something, and according to sworn court testimony from Rick Child's son, Carmack, the young boy, pulled out that pistol that was in his book bag and pointed it directly at him, at his son Andy. The son screams whatever warning to the father, and as a result, Mr. Child, Rick Child, shoots one single shot, striking the teenager in the lower back. Or how his attorney describes it, it was a certain type of shot that just wasn't quite a back shot.
What people don't realize is the shot, Brandon, came from right to left, slightly upward, back to front. And why that's important is everybody's saying back. It's really a flank shot, as you know the difference. So there's a difference between a back and there's a difference between a flank. And medical examiners are usually reluctant to say back because it has such a bad connotation. It's really a flank shot, and we talked about it. So for people looking, the shot is going from right to left, which would support the human body turning slightly this way. And if there's one person in the front, someone behind them, and somebody facing this way, it would support a right to left shot. And so Rick Chow's, whether people like it or not, his accounting of what happened on the 911 call, the body cam, and to me, all supported what the evidence will say. People don't want to hear that, but it supports the evidence. And yeah, I think I'm a pretty damn good trial lawyer, but I'm only as good as what the evidence is going to show. If I'm sitting up there lying and I look like a liar, the jury's going to convict. And so
now that you know that, now that you have that information, continuing on, the shot was fired, and Chow immediately tried to perform CPR while waiting for emergency services, but the wound was fatal. And just a few days ago, the jury looked at this evidence. They weighed the reality of an armed individual wielding a loaded firearm during a confrontation and acquitted Rick Chow of murder. So what do these two cases have in common? Well, they are both at the forefront of a potential race war because of those who refuse to take accountability. Look at how the mob responds every time one of these verdicts drop. Whether it's Carmelo Anthony being sent away for 35 years or Rick Chow being acquitted by the jury of his peers, the script from the public never changes. It is the textbook case of mass evasion, a complete and total refusal to accept basic accountability. And instead of looking at the destructive behavior that led to these tragedies, what do we see? We see immediate protests. We see the media spinning a narrative about a manufactured race war. We see activists flooding social media, weeping about how the justice system is broken and how America hates Black people and how these kids are just helpless victims of a cruel and biased machine. Much easier for a community to march outside of a courthouse and blame an abstract systemic boogeyman than it is to look in the mirror and ask the hard questions. You see, accepting reality means admitting something deeply uncomfortable. And that's that a 19-year-old carried a lethal weapon to a high school track meet and used it. And in the case of Mr. Child, a 14-year-old kid was walking the streets with a loaded semi-automatic 9mm pistol illegally. And when you strip away all of the political theater, the public outrage isn't actually about demanding justice. It's a defense mechanism. It's a desperate attempt to protect a narrative of perpetual victimhood. Because if you happen to admit that individual choices, poor impulse control, and illegal behavior are what causes these outcomes, then you'll have to admit that the solution isn't a protest. The solution is personal accountability. And by coddling this outrage and shielding people from the consequences of their actions, the media and the activist class aren't helping anyone. In fact, they are destroying the very communities they claim to protect. They are teaching a generation that the rules of the game don't apply to them and that universal metrics of success are a joke. And that as long as you can scream loud enough about racism, they'll never have to take responsibility for their own actions. We have to stop enabling the delusion. A system that holds individuals accountable to the law isn't broken, but a culture that rewards people for dodging accountability is truly broken. I believe this entire public meltdown is driven by the result of a few psychological issues or traps. And we're going to address those right after the break. You're listening to the Janelle King Show right here on Extra 106.3. I'm Janelle King. We're just getting started. Don't leave the table. We'll be right back.
I thought it was manslaughter too. They saying guilty of murder on Fox right now. They saying guilty of
Texas has stand your ground law, penal code, 9.31, 9.32. He had no reason to retreat. You don't have to retreat. Understand your ground. He had a right to be there. He was not the aggressor. This whole thing been racist. It was supposed to be a public court. They had a private court, all white jury.
Accountability and justice served, man, that's just what I'm looking for. You know, I don't think we can set a precedent anywhere if you come up, push me or shove me, that I can just automatically reach for a knife and, you know, murder you. I believe in self-defense, don't get me wrong, proportional, but I just don't think, because this would end up setting a precedent right here, in my opinion.
Welcome back to the Janelle King Show. I'm Janelle King, and this is Extra 106.3, and this is where we discuss kitchen table topics that are typically banned from family gatherings, but are absolutely necessary in order to have a strong republic. In today's table topic, we are discussing the age of no accountability. And you see, before the break, we laid out the cold hard facts on two massive court cases that are in the media right now: the murder conviction of 19-year-old Carmelo Anthony in Texas and the acquittal of Rick Child in South Carolina. Two completely different scenarios, but they share one glaring toxic symptom: a public mob and a mainstream media machine desperately trying to turn individual reckless choices into a manufactured race war. So we already talked about how society has completely lost the art of looking in the mirror, how they've traded the words I and me for it, you, and them. When a marriage fails, the immediate question is, what did he do? When a local business is destroyed during a riot, the media looks at the looters and they ask, what made you do this, rather than why did you do this? We have entered an era that treats personal responsibility like a disease rather than a cure. And it is actively destroying our cultural fabric. So in this segment of the show, we're going to address what I believe is at the root of these misguided delusions. Why are people running from the mirror? Why has accountability become public enemy number one? It's not an accident. This mass evasion of reality is driven by what I believe are a few psychological traps. And I believe these traps are keeping people completely locked into a perpetual victim mindset. So many of us have heard the saying, hard times create strong men, and strong men create good times, and good times create weak men, and then weak men create hard times. Well, I believe that we are in the era of weak men, weak humans. But the weaknesses is in the mind. And that leads me to my first psychological trap, which I believe is at the center, particularly of Black outrage, and it's the inferiority complex. So what happens to a society when you are constantly told that you are at the bottom of the totem pole and that there is an invisible force that only you can defeat, or those who look like you, and that it is perpetuated by those who don't look like you? I mean, you essentially are telling a group of people that the entire world hates them. And when a person suffers from deeply fragile self-worth, admitting to a mistake doesn't feel like an opportunity to grow. It feels like total personal destruction. Their mindset dictates that if they admit they are wrong, it proves that they really are less than everyone else. That it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in their head. So they lie, they deflect, they blame the world just to protect the bruised ego. It's not about the topic. It's not about wanting to feel wrong or better. Yet no, it's not about wanting to feel unseen or unheard. In the mind of these people, I would rather be loud and wrong, but heard, than to be right and overlooked. It gives people a sense of superiority to boycott businesses, although the business has nothing to do with the subject, or to donate their hard-earned money to a murderer, because at least you feel like you are a part of a tribe that ultimately sees and hears you. And that leads me to the next point: the fear of competition. You see, true accountability is terrifying because it requires metrics. It means that you have to step into the arena to be judged strictly on merit, on your effort, and on your actual output. And for a lot of people, it is much easier to blame an external, invisible rigged system for your failures than to actually compete, perform, and risk losing it all on a level playing field. Teddy Roosevelt said, "It's not the critic who counts. It's not the one who sits on the sidelines. It's the man in the arena who counts, the one who fights through his blood, sweat, and tears." I always tell new converts to the Republican Party, particularly Gen Zers or Black people who come and now here, part of the Republican Party. I always tell them that our party is not the Democrat Party. You don't get any special protections, set-asides, hand-holding. You're now jumping into the world of competition, and you are no longer competing against only Black people or majority Black people. You are not competing with those who believe in mental breaks and days off of work because you woke up feeling depressed. You are now in the Wild Wild West. And everyone, and I mean everyone, is using every tool in their bag to defeat you. Why? Because in America, you earn your success. And now this is a perfect time to talk about the next psychological trap, which is the fear of rejection. Because rejection is going to come if you're competing in a healthy, normal way. This is the terrified belief that if you stand up and own a failure, that your tribe, your peers, your community will completely abandon you. So instead of standing tall and taking the hit, people mask their errors and excuses and explosive defensiveness and pointing fingers at anyone and everyone just to keep their social standing intact. Nobody wants to be left off the guest list. Nobody wants to feel left out, but everybody wants to be respected. Well, unfortunately, it's hard to have it both ways. If you are truly going to take accountability and stand for what is right, then you better get used to not having a lot of friends or supporters. I am sure you have heard the saying, "It's lonely at the top." Well, it is. It's lonely. When you refuse to compromise because the mob has said otherwise, it can get quite lonely. You have to ask God to remove those seeds of rejection and learn how to stand on your own. When I was home with my parents and as a young girl, I was raised in a very strict religious household. I didn't wear jewelry. I didn't get my ears pierced until I was in college. I didn't wear pants. I didn't wear my first pair of jeans until I was in college. Also, we didn't celebrate any holidays. So when everybody else came back to school with all their new clothes for Christmas, we were still wearing our same clothes. It was extremely hard as a child, and it caused me to stick out in ways that I really didn't want to. But I also believe that it was one of the key factors that contributed to my courage and ability to stand alone today. You should try it if you haven't already, especially if you are one who has to have external validation repeatedly. You will get to know yourself better, and you will experience the best form of motivation there is: self-motivation. But I can't close the segment without discussing the absolute heavyweight champion of dodging reality, the ultimate boss of evasion itself: pride. I'm going to place a massive emphasis on this right here because it's extremely important to understand why pride is a problem. You know, the Bible says that pride comes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. That's Proverbs 16:18. We do not want to operate in pride. Pride is the deadliest blocker of them all. It is the stubborn, arrogant refusal to bend the knee to reality, data, or even the law. Pride convinces a person that burning the entire house down is better than admitting they were the one who left the stove on. It prefers total, catastrophic self-destruction over the basic humility required to change your life. And in politics, we see a lot of pride. Some of our country's greatest failures in policy continue to sit there because of pride. Because nobody wants to be the person to say, I was wrong. This has led to the fruit of pride, which is the double down. How many times have we seen the destruction of poor policies? We have children cutting off their genitalia and using puberty blockers in elementary school. And we still have doctors acting like this is normal. We have the quote unquote experts saying the spike in those identifying as trans or homosexual isn't a trend. Although we are seeing that over 60% of Gen Z identify as sexually fluid. This is not a trend? No. You have a pride issue. And you refuse to admit it, and refuse to admit when it's not working. Accountability isn't just saying, my bad, I'm so sorry, when your back is turned up against the wall. It is the radical, upfront ownership of your actions, your emotional reactions, and the ultimate trajectory of your life. You see, accountability forces you to forfeit the comfort of the victim mindset. Who's paying the price for this culture of evasion? Well, look no further than the community you belong to, particularly the Black community, which happens to be the most visible. But enabling this culture of no accountability by constantly shielding individuals from the consequences of their worst decisions under the guise of systemic victimization is doing more damage today than any abstract boogeyman ever could. It acts as an absolute anchor, keeping people stuck at the bottom. And it has birthed a modern, popular lie that I am so tired of hearing. And it's the myth that you can achieve elite success in this country while completely rejecting the established rules of the game, but understand the long-term math. Every time you compromise your principles for short-term comfort, you are fueling the exact societal rot we see today. The lawlessness in our schools, the chaos in our streets, the complete erosion of the family. You see, shielding people from accountability doesn't protect them, it handicaps them. It robs them of discipline and sets them up for failure. And then we act shocked when they end up facing 35 years in prison. You cannot build a successful life on a foundation of excuses. Not letting politicians, activists, and the media profit off of your grievance while your community stays anchored to the bottom. It is time to break the chains and to break the cycle. We have to stop being weak men who create hard times. We have to forfeit the comfort of the victim mindset. Look yourself square in the mirror and take radical, unapologetic ownership of your destiny. The mob won't build your future. Only you can. So after the break, I'm closing the show with some tools that you can use to help aid in freeing yourself from these fears that have led to minimal accountability. We are almost done. You're listening to the Janelle King Show. I'm Janelle King. It's Extra 106.3. Don't leave the table. Thank you so much for joining the show. Please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so you'll be notified every time I upload new content. Now back to the discussion. Welcome back to the Janelle King Show. I'm Janelle King. This is Extra 106. And this is where we discuss kitchen table topics that are typically banned from family gatherings, but are absolutely necessary in order to have a strong republic. And today's table topic is no different. We're talking about the age of no accountability. Now, before the break, we went deep into the absolute root causes of our modern accountability crisis. We used the public backlash over the Carmelo Anthony and the Rick Child verdicts to expose how our society has completely traded personal responsibility for a manufactured race war. We also talked about how we've entered this dangerous era of mental weakness, where people search for external scapegoats, completely trading the words I and me for it and you and them, rather than practicing the lost art of looking in the mirror and taking personal responsibility. We broke down the exact psychological traps that are driving this mass evasion of reality. We exposed the toxic inferiority complex that makes people's self-worth so fragile that they would rather be loud and wrong, but heard by the mob, than to face the truth. We called out the fear of competition that keeps people sitting comfortably on the sidelines, blaming a rigged system instead of stepping into the high-stakes arena where their success can be earned. We tackled the fear of rejection that forces people to rely on explosive defensiveness just to protect their tribal standing. And we put a massive spotlight on pride, the ultimate boss of evasion that causes our culture and our leaders to disastrously double down on failing policies and chaotic trends rather than experiencing the basic humility to admit fault. I also laid out the brutal, unfiltered truth that shielding individuals from the consequences of their choices under the guise of protection heavily handicaps the Black community. As if there's this anchor that's keeping people stuck at the bottom. Because true success cannot and will not ever be built on a foundation of grievances. So we tackled the fear of rejection that forces people to rely on explosive defensiveness just to protect their tribal standing. And we put a massive spotlight on pride, the ultimate boss of evasion that causes our culture and our leaders to disastrously double down on failing policies and chaotic trends rather than experiencing the basic humility to admit fault. We laid it all out. We laid out the brutal, unfiltered truth that shielding individuals from consequences of their choices under the guise of protection heavily handicaps the community and those who are refusing to accept responsibility and accountability, acting as an anchor, keeping people stuck at the bottom. Because true success cannot and will not ever be built on a foundation of grievances. So now we're back for the final segment of the show, and we're turning the page, and it's time to break the cycle of this weak mind. So in this final segment, I'm stepping out of my commentator chair, and I am giving you a blueprint. I am providing you with the actual actionable steps that you need right now to confront these fears, to kill the victim mentality, and to free yourself from the cultural traps that have paralyzed personal growth for far too long. So I'm going to talk to you straight from the heart because this is the truth. Some of you listening are trapped. You're trapped in those psychological spirals. You're trapped inside of your own mind, locked in a prison built by the fear of rejection, the fear of competition, and a massive wall of pride. And I get it. I really, really do. It is exhausting to feel like you are constantly fighting to be seen, or terrified that you dropped your guard and admit you made a mistake to the people only for them to turn around and walk away. That fear of being left out, that pain of feeling inferior. It is a real human emotion, and I can validate that. But hear me when I say this. Understanding your pain is not the same as excusing your stagnation. If you're ever going to break free from the age of no accountability, you have to experience a radical, fundamental shift in your mindset. You have to stop viewing accountability as a punishment and start viewing it as the ultimate power. So I want to break down the shift that you can make right now. First, we have to deal with the crippling fear of rejection. We have a generation that is completely drunk on external validation. You support narratives you know are a lie, like men having babies. And then you defend behaviors you know is destructive, just so you can say that you're on the guest list. You have to ask God to heal the spirit of rejection and to cultivate the courage to stand entirely alone. Because the moment you decide that your self-respect and truth matters more than the temporary applause by the mob, you become very dangerous. Then there's the fear of competition. A lot of people are terrified to compete because of their self-worth is so tied up in their fragile inferiority complex. They think that if I try my hardest and I still lose, it means I really am less than everybody else. So they hide behind excuses. They blame the system before they can even lace up their shoes. When you step into a competitive environment, whether that's a new job, a boardroom, or starting a business, and you fail, that failure is not a death sentence. It's just data. It is a roadmap showing you exactly where you need to tighten up, work harder, build discipline. The Republican movement, the conservative mindset, we thrive on merit. We don't offer hands or to hold or special participation trophies. We offer the beautiful, rugged freedom to test your own limits and be responsible for yourself. And to stop looking for a rigged system to blame and start looking for a standard to keep or even beat. And finally, we have to talk about this heavyweight champion, pride. The stubborn, arrogant refusal to look in the mirror and say these three simple words: I was wrong. You know, my house, we watch pride like a hawk because we know that the biblical math is very clear, that pride comes before destruction and that a haughty spirit comes before the fall. People will literally watch their lives, their families, their communities burn to the ground before they experience the humility required to admit that they made a mistake. Only a deeply secure, strong individual that has a spine to look at a situation realizes they dropped the ball and they take immediate action, radical ownership to fix it. When you drop the pride, you stop wasting energy defending your past mistakes and you start using that energy to build your future. No. Here's the bottom line. Accountability is not an anchor designed to hold you down. It is a rudder that allows you to steer your own ship. The moment you stop saying, what made you do this? And you start asking yourself, why did I do this? Is the exact moment you take all of your power back. You have to stop letting politicians, media talking heads, and professional activists profit off of your grievance. They want to scare you. They want you to be prideful. They want to coddle you. Because a dependent victim is easily controlled. Forfeit the comfort of the excuse. Drop the armor of victimhood. Look yourself in the mirror today and take ownership for your actions. And go build the life you were actually created to live. Until next time, stay unafraid, stay unapologetic, and never stop seeking the truth.